conversations are really about a co-creation between two human beings. And when I converse with somebody, I really take it seriously, like I'm co-creating that moment. Like
Mm.
right now, this is a co-creation of a conversation that makes up the matter of our lives.
All right. Well, we're finally doing it. So I'm finally launching my podcast, The Matter of Conversations. And I thought it was only fitting that my first guest should be you, my
Thank
business
you.
partner in crime. And you and I have had conversations about this for years and years and years. So I want you to know, just because we work together and we've known Eva forever, this is not going to be a fluff interview. It's going to be
Oh,
a hard interview, and
bring
we're
it.
going to see if you can, hang with the big dog.
Okay, fine.
All right, we're going to jump right in. So, how would you define conversations?
Speaking and listening, I think conversations are really about a co-creation between two human beings. And when
Mm,
I converse with somebody, I really take it seriously, like I'm co-creating that moment. Like
mm,
right now, this is a co-creation of a conversation that makes up the matter of our lives.
mm. And so, speaking and listening, so diving a little bit deeper into that, like what what motivates the speaking? What motivates the listening?
Oh,
So I want to
that
go
depends on
deep
the
into the conversation.
individual.
Well, because here's the thing: is why I wanted to do this is you and I have talked about this. I have a huge passion about conversations. It's been our tagline at Wasabi: conversations change everything, right? But
Yes.
I don't know if we've ever stepped back to really dive into what does it really mean conversation. I love it. Yes, speaking and listening, right? Most people talk about the speaking and the listening piece I love, but diving, what motivates us to do that?
Well, first of all, let me say that I have a commitment in this conversation that your listeners, our listeners, for this podcast get great value. So, one
Hmm.
thing that I promise you in this conversation is you're going to leave today's conversation having new insight into your life. And that really points to what speaking and listening is. Most of us, and this is probably my master's degree in human development working, right? Most of us are actually speaking about complaints, about my dog ate my socks this morning, or the traffic was bad. We're really commiserating, trying to find somebody to co-create our misery, our suffering, because life is so whatever.
Hmm.
If you're if you're a committed person and you're up to something and you're living life, I think it's like glass half empty, glass half full. If you're a glass half full type of person, then I think you're going to be looking at the positive side and how to actually co-create to move forward something that you're committed to in life. For example, not
Hmm.
a day goes by that I don't think about my own death.
Hmm.
There's a Buddhist tradition where they think about their death 3 times a day on purpose.
Hmm. Is that in what country does that?
Yeah,
The country actually stops. Yes.
I can't. My
Yeah.
this brain, this senior brain,
It,
in my 50s already, old
uh,
AF. I
yes,
can't remember.
it's gonna drive me crazy through the whole
Well,
area.
everybody can look at it in Michael
Yeah.
Easter's book. If this interests you, is in Michael Easter's book, The Comfort Crisis.
Mm,
Just read it. Fantastic book. Highly recommend it. And he's a former journalist, and then goes through why our lives where we don't embrace the suck. As a
mm,
whitewater kayaker, as a mountain biker, my hobbies are to embrace the suck,
mm,
right? So I've over my lifetime, because I started doing that shortly after I met you, Drew, when we were doing seminars together at landmarkworldwide.com. And I created then, I was like, I want more adventure in my life. So
mm,
I go out and play, and then it's cold or it's wet or it's like we just got back from Moab, Utah, my husband and I, right? It's was dry and hot, and I thought I was going to die on these trails, but it made me stronger, and
Mm,
it actually got into the deep part of who I am as a human being. If we look at conversations, these are the types of conversations that I'm up to having.
mhm,
Now, it's not that, look, if you're dealing with a crisis, especially an emotional crisis, and go to a therapist and talk about your complaints, talk about what ails you. That's important to get it out, or have a committed listener. Oftentimes I would call you, Drew, and be like, I just need somebody to listen so I can articulate what's going on in this white matter of my head,
mhm. Yep.
um, but I don't want it to be just vomit. I want it to actually co-create something I'm up to. And when I'm thinking about my death and I think about my legacy and what I want to do on the planet, I want to make sure that every single moment is moving forward that legacy.
Mm.
And that's conversations that matter. That's what we do at PR with our PR firm. We take people's really heartfelt life experiences, what their passions are, why they write books, why they make courses, what they want to teach the world, what they want to share with the world. And then we just enlarge and empower that conversation so that more people are having that conversation.
If you look, back through your life, are there conversations? Can you think of a conversation that you had that impacted life?
Yeah, one you had with me.
We've had
So
so
there we
many.
were.
Which brilliant one was it?
Oh, so good. So we were in Cincinnati, Ohio. It was the
Mm.
90s, the mid
Yep.
90s. And you were leading self expression and leadership. And I was the noisy kid in the classroom, always with a question. And you would always end the seminar with, details don't matter, and the devil's in the details, and they're all that matter. You'd have like this like little riddle about the
Yep.
details,
Mhm.
and like it don't sweat over the details, and the details are where life happens, is what
Mm.
you were always saying. That's what I got, at least that's what I heard.
Mm.
Going back to
Brilliant.
speaking and listening,
Yeah.
that's what I incorporated into my life. And I'll be washing the dishes and I'll think to myself, the devil's in the details. You know
Mm.
what I mean?
Yeah.
Details,
Yeah.
they don't matter, but they do matter. I don't have to wash this dish right now, but I know as a self-care practice, I need a clean kitchen. It's just what I need, right?
Mm.
Because I don't like when I'm in disorder, I can't let my creativity flow.
Mm.
Everybody's different. Some people like chaotic environments to let the creativity go. Everybody's different. Is that what you meant by that statement, by the way? Why
I
don't you elaborate? And I'll listen 20 plus years later in a
oh,
different way.
yeah, I wish I could remember because it sounds like whatever I said was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, I think it was that
Right.
you have to be two-headed about life. Like in one hand, details don't matter, and in the other, details are where life happens. So it's being two-headed about life as it kind of unfolds, and you need both of those. And like you say, like for you in that moment doing the dishes, the devil was in the details, right? And that's really what there was about mindfulness. But people can also get too attached to the details and becoming
Right.
fixed and stuck. So you're going through life being too headed about those two things simultaneously.
For
Yeah.
sure. And
Yeah.
like, when my mom was visiting, my mom's 87. She'll be 88 this year. And
Oh,
she
mom,
visited for
we
several
love
months
her.
over the holidays. And, like any mother daughter relationship, um, she reminds me what I need to do to take care of myself, right?
Mm,
And for, you can hear that as loving, and other people would hear that as nagging. I chose to hear it as loving. And sometimes I just, put down the cleaning utensil or whatever and just like, let's go for a walk. Let's
mm,
be together. Um, the When we go back to looking at the end point, and then we look back to today. So maybe I'm just really moved by Michael Easter's portion of that book about the Buddhists and thinking about the
mm,
death, and he explains an Alaska um, hunt that he did. It's a really great book. So he's got this adventure story that's coupled with all these articles that he's written for health magazines through the years.
Mm,
Really
brilliant.
fascinating.
Yeah.
Little things like maybe we shouldn't be bathing every day. And I thought, what are we like back in the what was it, the 14th century where we said bathing wasn't good, like it was bathing was of the devil. But he was basically making the point of our microbiome and that
Mm,
it's okay to be, in the Alaska wilderness for a month like he was, you
yeah.
know.
Yes.
And for sure, my husband and I have done trips like that where we're just in the middle of nowhere, for
Mm,
days on end, where you're, um, it's fun stuff, those types of adventures.
mm. So when you think back to that conversation, what do you think in that? Because I can think back on my life also. There are those pivotal conversations, and I'm so curious about what do you think it was about that moment, that conversation that had such a profound impact on you?
I think that generally we're speaking and listening on where we need to grow next. So
Mm,
if our life, if we have the fundamental belief that we are safe and we're okay, then we're not going to be in a survival conversation.
yeah.
However, every single moment is your unfolding life. And I like to believe that my life is perfectly unfolding the way that it should and the way that it shouldn't, and that alleviates stress for me. It's hard sometimes when there's a lot of stress or there's a lot of tragedy, and you just kind of, I personally believe in God, so I sit and have a moment, with my higher power and go, okay, I don't know that I can actually go through this emotionally,
Mm,
physically, whatever it takes. But then I go, okay, what am I supposed to learn?
mm,
And I think that when you have, if you think about your brain, and we've got the side of our brain that's very logical, and I live in America. We're very capitalistic. You're very data driven, very science driven. But I've also studied with indigenous people, and they're more led from the creative side, the intuitive side. And if we look at like, well, what side of the brain needs to be balanced, right? So if you're living in an intuitive society, maybe you need a little more of that data driven stuff, and vice versa. Just the way that I look at when I teach my fitness classes, I think about the balance of the exercises for the body. I like to also think about that with the brain.
mm,
And if you think about your conversations as where the rubber meets the road, then why are you sitting at a coffee shop having a conversation about complaints
mm.
when it's
Yeah.
just as easy to ask, like drawing out questions like, hey Drew, what are you passionate about? Hey Drew, what do you love about life? Hey, what do you think, where will you be in a year? Where will you be in 5 years? How about 20 years?
Mm,
Nobody's asking those, or not too many people are asking those questions, but that's what I really want to know about my friends
mm.
you know
That's gold right there. So that is life changing. What you delivered in the beginning is that alone shifting. And when you feel a complaint coming on, ask a question. I think questions are, I love questions because it interrupts whatever that flow is. We're hijacked. Our brain's hijacked when we're in that complaining mode, like bitching and complaining, and asking a conversation, like you said, like, what do you love about your life? Or, what's turning on? Where do you want to be in 5? It snaps you out of there and it creates a possibility in that moment, which I think returns us to ourselves.
Now look, I'm gonna talk about a really sensitive moment, a very sensitive story, okay? So I had a friend who just got back from Costa Rica. It's a kayaker, and I don't know, like 2023 has just, I guess it's post pandemic, and people are still passing. Well,
Mm,
she had a person on her trip, and the person didn't come to the bus to go on the kayaking trip that morning, and everybody's
mm,
like, well, where is she? So they go back into her room, and she passed peacefully in the night, like we
mm,
all would hope to pass, right?
right.
She was in her late 60s. And it really has me, I just learned about this story in the past week. And it really has me thinking about, like, well, that would be a nice death. Like that would be something like to go in your sleep. I'm like, that would be the bright side of my sleep apnea, right? But at the same time, like, well, you never know when it's coming for us, right? You
Mhm.
never know. And
Yep.
we don't talk about that in many cultures. In other cultures, we actually celebrate it.
Yeah.
So I'm just, in my family, we talked about it. My parents were both nurses. So we talked about it at the dinner table, right? My mom will call me out of the blue, and just say, she's German, Michelle, this is what I want at my funeral. These songs, the other people to invite. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, it's like
Right, or
Tuesday. I'm
yeah.
working. I don't really want to be thinking about planning your funeral. Oh, it's all right. Everybody dies, Michelle. It's all right. And
It's
I'm just like,
amazing.
okay, I'm not in a normal family, right? This not everybody talks about this. But if you
Yeah.
think about that and you think about like, and so she was really talking, and my friend was talking about this story about this woman, and she was talking a lot more than she ever does in our relationship when we were having Korean food, stone bowl. If you ever had the opportunity to have a Korean stone bowl that comes in this big cast iron bowl, it's delicious. Rice, vegetables.
Was the rice crunchy on the bottom?
Yes,
Because it had been there,
delicious. Yes,
completely
delicious.
jelly belly.
So we're having a stone bowl, and she's just going on about finding this woman, and then like how her life culminated, and she had experiences with ceremony and being on. So she had to help everybody else kind of like contextualize what just had happened, right? And they went kayaking because they felt like she would have wanted them to go on with their adventure, which I would believe that most kayakers would feel that way. And it has me just really considering, wow, right? Like she had no idea, and there she was just going on a vacation, and I'm like, okay, I wonder if she felt like she had done everything in her life. I wonder if she felt like she
Mm.
was really living what she was committed to. So when we look at my friend who's like found her and was, I just listened. And even though I'm a talker, and at the moment when we talk about speaking and listening, in that moment, she needed to speak and my listening was a gift. Other times, I've been really crazed about something that would happen in my life, and I would speak, and she would listen, and then that was the gift to me.
Hmm.
Other times, the speaking is the gift, saying hard things that nobody else will tell you. My husband does it all the time, right? Especially like now at this stage of my life, right? Post menopause, he's like, baby, I want you to live a long time. It's really time to like, he doesn't shame me or anything. He goes, I just want you to live a long time. What he's saying is maybe I shouldn't have that second piece of cake. You
Mhm.
know what I'm saying? That's a hard thing to say to your wife. And he says it in such a compassionate, loving manner. That's also a gift.
Mhm.
So it's interesting, like, when we talk about speaking and listening, I don't think that many of us walk around discerning why it matters
Mm.
and if it's a gift or not.
Yeah, so I wanna kind of like zoom out now to the macro.
All right.
One of the things that I have really been fascinated about in our 25-year journey with Wasabi Publicity is why certain clients' conversations go out in the world very easily and have a huge impact, and why some don't.
Hmm.
And so I'm kind of fascinated. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that some people's conversations just kind of naturally flow out into the world and others I mean, we always get results, but sometimes it's a lot of work.
Well,
Yeah.
sometimes people are having conversations ahead of their time, right?
Mm,
If you think
yeah.
about some of our greatest thinkers on the planet, they
Yeah.
were they were having a conversation, and some of them were put to death for that conversation.
Yeah. Do you
So
think
that's
there
probably one of the reasons.
I think that for me, what I'm also curious about conversations is the energy behind them. Like, we're going into woo-woo land here a bit, but I have been it feels to me there's something when you're talking about speaking and listening, there's something about alignment. And why conversations actually make a difference, like with Shannon, is everything is so aligned with him to make a difference energetically for you, so you hear it in a particular way. And
Hmm.
I'm really fascinated also about the frequency and the energy of conversations, because I do feel like clients that are perfectly aligned, meaning they live their life that is consistent with their messages, and their messages all aligned with, their teachings. So I'm fascinated about that. So what do you think about that? Am I just off in woo land, or do you think there's something behind that?
No, well, let's just, some people might need to catch up. So Drew said macro, and when we talk about conversations, there are macro conversations on the planet, and you can find them by looking at like HuffPost, right? The Huffington Post website, or a USA Today, and then there's, education, politics, science. These are macro conversations. And there's the micro conversations. My dog ate my socks. Shannon happens to be my husband. We're actually recording this. Today is our 18th anniversary, and we've been together for 22 years.
Happy
So
anniversary.
thank you. For someone who has overcome complex PTSD, and has such an amazing relationship with somebody, I really want to celebrate that, because that's a big
Mm.
deal for somebody who has complex PTSD from childhood. So, what I want to say about our clients, and whether they're either tapping into that macro or they're staying at a micro level. So
Mm.
when you tap into the macro, it's it's also not only like I'm having like a universal or conversation that applies to all of humanity, like the core of human development and what makes people tick, or fundamental education for a child or a human, Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, things like that. Or one of the things that I think is important is that whether you're with the zeitgeist of the time or not.
Mm.
So sometimes you'll tap into a conversation that everybody's having, and then sometimes you're having a conversation or an insight that's ahead of your time, right? Like one of the things that's another book that I read was called Outlive by Dr. Peter Attia, and Outlive talks about the last 3 decades of one's life. And these are not clients, by the way. I just like to read current books with my other yoga teachers. Okay, so this book really grabbed the zeitgeist of the time, because for the first time ever in human history, we have an abundance of food around us, but an obesity epidemic, and
Mm.
people are living into these last 3 decades. So then, how does a human body become 100 years old, playing that 100-year-old game, right? So that book, like, because everybody's having that conversation, he kind of just took it up to that macro level of current research that we know from all the time. Here's what the last 3 decades of life look like for those centenarians who actually make it to that old age. And it's interesting to have read that book and then have my mom come for 2 months, and she's 88, and to just see her fundamental things that she does for self-care that are currently aligned with these people who live that long.
Mm.
So I think that why a conversation will go like wildfire is because you're not only tapping into the macro, but you're also tapping into the zeitgeist of the time, conversations that most people care about.
Mm. Yeah.
And the energy behind it, well, that goes back to commitment. So,
Yeah, I
the
think
reason why that you have that background of relatedness, and people don't remember what you say, they remember how you make them feel, says Maya
Mhm.
Angelou.
Mhm. Right. So what do you think the that are the most pressing conversations that are happening out there on the macro level?
Democracy right now.
Democracy.
Democracy for sure. Everybody's having a conversation about what is the best way to govern a society. Because it's not just, some people believe in socialism if you go to
Yeah.
different countries, right? So
Well,
like,
I'm in a former socialist country, and it's amazing to me because we have friends that have thrived very well under capitalism here, but still long for the days of communism. Actually, they loved it because everybody had the same shitty car, and did the same 2 week vacations. So it's amazing to me, but a lot of them still are really pine for those days.
my mother, a Bavarian, and so my cousins, they all have um, more of a socialist healthcare system than we do here in America.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to have conversations. I think that at the end of the day, what's really of interest to a lot of people is government in general, because it impacts how you live and your freedoms. So
Yeah.
that's one, but also health. Again, the we see the earth warming around us. Right? Like, my winters are very different than previous winters, and we feel that,
Now
and
the
we kind of
debate's still
wonder.
out what's causing that. So just so we're clear, we're inclusive here of all
For sure.
ways of thinking. Yes. So
I'm
yeah,
just saying, it's we just notice weather. Now, all
we
I'm
notice
saying is, like, no
weather.
matter where you come from, because there's and that's
Yes.
that's a good publicist, right? Just
Yeah.
having a good conversation, and not making one right or wrong, just asking those questions, and having reporters think about, and journalists think about, this is a conversation that people want to have. This is of interest to people. And what takeaways are you going to talk about? That kind of thing, right?
Yeah.
And if I think about the other conversations that matter, I mean, it boils down to one of the things I always say to all of our clients, this, Drew. At the end of the day, people really just want to talk about health, wealth, and
Yeah.
love.
Yeah.
How am I going to be healthier? Am I going to make move up in my career, be a little more comfortable with my creature habits, and then love, not only the love that you share sexually with a partner, but also the intimacy that you share with friends, or the intimacy, those intimate conversations you might have with a teenager, right? Or a younger child, or the intimacy that you share with, like, we've got a dog, right? That our dog is so loving, right? And then that experience of peace and love that exists, that's what we talk about when we say love, like, all of it.
Yeah.
God love, right? Spirituality. So health, wealth, and love encompasses a lot.
Yeah. And I think that it's interesting because I think while our clients are really about health, wealth, and love, I feel like sometimes they get drowned out with other macro conversations that don't
Totally.
actually impact that. And I feel great about the work that we do because I feel like we're interrupting that. Because the truth of the matter is that is for me, we as human beings, that's what we need to be focused on is health, wealth, and love, not these other conversations that are happening, which are absolutely impacting all of those things in a very concrete way, but we're not talking about it in that way.
Well, if we think about, one of the reasons why I decided to get a master's degree in human development is that I was fundamentally interested in how to, because I was working in early childhood education, writing curriculum, and working with the National Head Start Association and the National Association for the Education of Young Children. And early on in my career, I got present to like, how you can actually build the potential of a brain
Mm,
or not, right? That was the conversations we were having in the 90s. Now it's, it moves on. Now everybody's talking about what's happening with your brain and how can you actually train your brain. And gosh, Elon Musk has even put technology now in our brain. So
ah!
what's next? I find it all fascinating, right?
Yeah,
Because these are conversations that matter.
they are.
That's a
Yeah.
conversation that matters, right?
Yes.
You know, uh, People are now talking smack about Tucker Carlson and Putin's interview. Especially, I live in the South, so I have the luxury of walking outside my door, and I have Democrats, Libertarians, Republicans, independent, like, just all of it at the same dinner table, which, by the way, tomorrow night I'm going to have one of those dinners with my local bee club. But what if you listen, you're going to hear people's commitments. If you listen, you're going to hear what matters to that person. If they're complaining about a family member, then what I hear is they're really committed to that relationship and restoring intimacy and happiness to that relationship. If they're complaining about, like at the gym where I teach fitness classes in the morning just for fun, they're complaining about their feet, or they're complaining about their fingers and their hands don't work like they did when they were 20. Well, they just want to restore strength.
Yeah.
You see? And then when it comes to career, or people who like are afraid they're going to lose their jobs in our economy, what they're saying really is they're all of a sudden they don't feel safe, that they
Yeah.
can actually provide for themselves. So if you just, you and I call this the unsaid, like what's underneath
Mm.
the headline, what's underneath the headline. And that's where you get into these juicy conversations. And that's all we're really doing in our PR campaigns, is we're getting up under how that really contributes to everyone, the public at large, because these are things that are of interest to everyone. Don't you want to know how to be healthier? Don't you want to know how to be more comfortable? Don't you want to know how to have more intimacy in your life? Of course you do. We're
So,
humans.
yeah, I hadn't really. What's great about this, I'm actually seeing is fundamentally we've stopped having conversations.
Yeah, for social, the thing about, like,
Yeah, like
stock, yeah. Yeah,
we, yeah,
social media. Yeah,
yeah, it's so interesting. That's a whole other. We could have a
that's
whole
a
other
whole other
podcast,
episode, because
but it
social
is
media
uh,
is not speaking and listening, it's
right.
show me.
But
I'm showing.
we've been trained now. We've been groomed to not have conversations. We've been trained to be passive and just let information come to us. And wow, I hadn't really thought about in launching this podcast the relevance and really the importance to just merely bring conversations back to the table.
Right.
So people start communicating and having conversation, because that is been lost, and we see that, for me, is the most pressing issue that we have before us for humanity.
Yeah, like, it's, the movie Social Dilemma, um, where we have these tech giants, these people who've left these tech companies only to reflect on how we've turned our communication systems into yet another addiction.
Yes.
And so we're trying to, like, get the pellet, like rats, we're trying to get the pellet off of our phone every day, because that dopamine hit, that feel good hit. But at the same time, then you're exhausted or you're depressed, and you're like, why do I feel this way? Well,
Mm.
maybe because you're actually interacting with a screen versus an actual human being. And look, I am not a Zoom hater. I love the digital freedom that we get from our Zoom meetings. I mean, gosh, Drew, you and I, before video conferencing, we did bridge lines, right? So we've been communicating via a virtual way for many, many years.
Yeah.
You can have a real conversation digitally, but you have to remember that there is some sensory loss, right? So there is a sensory loss when you text a friend and you don't hear back. Then all of a sudden you start making up your meaning, not, or your emotion, not actually what was said.
Mm.
And if we could get everybody on the planet to understand that text is not with emotion, and that you have to check it out with the person to really understand what was said,
Yeah.
well, that would change humanity overnight in this planet.
Amen. And that is the perfect place to end. And you've delivered in spades. I love this conversation. I love it because you and I don't get the opportunity to just step back and have these conversations. And so I
Right.
really appreciate you joining me for my first episode.
My pleasure.
Go have an amazing anniversary dinner with your
Thank
husband.
you. Thank
And
you.
I'll be talking to you in like 5 minutes. Bye.
Bye bye.